Yeah.
Um, Good morning, everybody. I'm Drew Carter from Holy Cross. Thanks so much for coming today. Excited that you're here with us. Today we're going to talk about how applications are really read. And we know this is a busy time of year, so we're going to make your time worth it. We'll go around the horn real quick for very quick introductions, and then we're going to get started with how the academic profile, in particular, transcript and testing are read. So today I'm joined by Kate.
Hi, everybody. Kate Guertin, Director of Northeast Recruitment for Dickinson College, based full-time up here in the Boston area for the college, and I manage recruitment for New England and New York. Nice to see you all.
And Ed?
Hi, folks. I'm Ed Seero, Senior Associate Director of Admissions at UMass Lowell, and happy to join.
Okay, Ed, let's start with you. Academic profile, let's start particularly with the transcript. When you guys are reading the transcript at UMass Lowell, are you recalculating GPA? Are you just recording it as it's reported by the high school? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, the Mass Department of Higher Education asks public colleges and universities to recalculate a grade point average. And you actually can see exactly how that works if you're really ambitious and do one yourself on the Department of Higher Ed's webpage. We do weigh classes. We weigh certain classes a little bit more, like a science with a lab would have more of a weight than a non-US history, for instance. But generally speaking, we say that the GPA that your school says is pretty close to what the GPA recalc is going to be. But again, if you're super ambitious and really want to know, you can do it yourself or talk to your college counselor. They're a really good resource for sort of understanding what we're doing.
Sorry, I should have mentioned in the intro, you can put questions in the Q&A. We'll happily monitor that, and closed captioning is available. Kate, at Dickinson, are you recalculating like Ed's doing at UMass Lowell?
No, we're not at all, actually. And what we're really doing is taking a look at students in context of the schools that they come from. So understanding that every single high school out there is different in terms of what's offered to students, how students can challenge themselves, what the learning environment looks like, how schools dealt with COVID. Those are all differences. And so we really look at what's the range of coursework a student's taking, how are they challenging themselves, what are the trends on their application, while also keeping in mind how the student might describe or how recommenders describe how the student thrives and in what type of learning environment. So really taking all of those things into consideration.
And just to make it wildly more unpredictable, we're probably a third option where we're maybe closer to Kate at Dickinson. Holy Cross, we're not recalculating the GPA, but we have sort of a grid that we fill out as we read through the transcript that focuses on classes from the 5 major academic areas, that records rigor at the 2 highest levels, whatever your school reports that to be, and then looks at year-end grades earned in the 5 major academic areas. Are you guys looking at coursework outside the 5 major academic areas?
We look at it, but when kind of thinking about grades and thinking about rigor, we're focused in on those 5 core academic areas.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we do count electives if they're an academic elective and college prep. Outside of that, not so much. But we do take a closer look at things like math and science if somebody's interested in STEM, engineering, computer science in particular. So yeah, that's how we look at it.
And when you guys are looking, so Kate, you talked about rigor and what's available to the student at that school. Are you getting most of that from the school profile, or do you have your own historical records at Dickinson that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, you know what, certainly leaning heavily on that school profile or what might be on that secondary school report that's submitted with the Common App, where schools are telling us we teach this many AP courses or whatever their highest level of difficulty, what those courses are called, and how many honors or mid kind of difficulty courses they're offered. And then we're taking a look at how many courses are a student taking within each of those rigor levels. Often, our own institutional knowledge of the schools we work with as well comes into play. Having worked with schools, some of the same schools for years and years, we lean on that, but certainly training goes in with new counselors to kind of help them understand the schools, where to look for that information, again, to be evaluating students within the context of what's provided to them.
Ed, real quickly, question here in the Q&A, computer science, are you counting that? At Holy Cross, we would consider that as one of the 5 major academic areas. What about at UMass Lowell?
So like, I think it depends on the school, but in general, yes, it can count as a math or a science actually. And so it depends on the course content, and we do look at that. And also the rigor, an AP computer science is a lot different than, like a sort of more technical computer science that you might find at some schools that's not as academic. And
Gotcha.
so we really do look at the context of what the course is. And actually, I'd say that's true. Even though we recalculate, we are also like, we ask counselors to know their schools really well.
Right.
Because not all GPAs are the same. And
Right.
so a 3.75 from one school is very different from the 3.75 at another school, if you know the context over time. As we all probably are aware, like there's a lot of grade inflation, and it's more or less at certain schools, and we try to make sure that we know that, or at least have new folks able to pick the brain of somebody who does know that.
Right.
So luckily for a lot of us, we've been here for 20 years now, so we kind of know the vast majority of the schools, and if we don't, we can look at some contextual clues to figure out what we're looking at. So yeah.
And
I would just comment too real quick that, grading scales we know can look different school to school as well. And so even if we're not taking an average or taking the GPA, understanding when we're kind of looking and counting grades, what is an A at this school versus what's a B and what's a C, and on, really having an understanding of the grading scale, which you all provide as well.
what about, we get this question all the time, particularly in the spring, a 4th year of language during the student's senior year. At Holy Cross, our answer is pretty easy. We're not looking for the 4th year of language. If that student wants to drop language, that's fine with us. But we are a competitive admissions pool, so we like to see that course replaced with something either from the core areas or something with rigor. How do you guys feel about that 4th year of language?
Well, we require at least 2 years. I would say it's recommended to see at least 2 years of a language. But as a place that really values global education, I'd say when we're thinking about elements of fit with a community, those students who have taken 4 years of language or maybe taken multiple languages in high school, that could be an element of fit. That when we think about a student's happiness at Dickinson, that might be something that we're taking into consideration, but will not hurt a student if we do not see that 4th year.
It's not something we look for in evaluation or evaluation or anything like that. It's really as long as they've fulfilled the Department of Higher Ed curriculum, and beyond that, great. That's really what we're looking for.
And one final quick follow-up, because this is different than how we do it at Holy Cross. At Holy Cross, every student enters without a major, so we're never reviewing the transcript in context of the student's intended area of study. Sounds, Ed, like you are keeping that in mind, particularly with STEM majors at Lowell. Are there other programs that you're looking at the transcript through a different lens?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of counselors on here would be aware, like nursing is almost its own world of admissions, and we do look at it. And there's actually, like, the nursing pool gets a lot more eyes and evaluative eyes on it than the non-nursing pool. And it's just a different group of kids. It's largely self-selected though. Like most kids who are interested in nursing have heard from every school they're interested in that it's super competitive. So it's in that context. But yeah, we do look at we do very much consider what the student has applied for, but we also make sure that we ask them to give us some alternate choices if they're not a great fit for their first choice. And even though we try not to admit people into the major that they don't want necessarily, we are very into the idea of being more inclusive than exclusive. And so if they give us an option, we will take that and hope for the best. I mean, 40% of students change their major anyway, so
right.
It's a necessity to evaluate for majors, but it's also not like they're locked in.
How about at Dickinson, Kate? Do you guys look through the transcript through a different lens?
No, we really don't. I mean, I'd say we want to see that the student is challenging themselves. We don't admit to programs either. So just to kind of take that a step back, everyone's undeclared the first full semester. But we do pay attention to what they're indicating as a first choice program, knowing that many students now are applying to us indicating a first choice major and not saying undecided. But I would say we're not letting that guide us in terms of what we're seeing on the transcript. I would say we want to see students challenging themselves in ways that make sense for them as a student. So where there is a strong student in a certain subject, if the school offers the chance for the student to take more challenging coursework in that subject, we'd expect to see the challenge.
One final question on academic profile. I got this question via text from one of my favorite counselors this morning, so I hope she's listening and not multitasking. But AP scores. Will you guys factor those into your review of an application? And if so, what do you think of how much weight do they carry in your review? Even if the school offers that course, and more commonly now, sometimes we're seeing students report AP scores if their high school doesn't even offer that course. So what are your thoughts on AP scores? Ed?
We don't really get scores themselves until late. So we're really just looking at AP courses, and we give it a full letter grade higher in the recalc. So that, assuming the student does well, it can really help. The scores, we award course credit for certain scores, but again, we generally receive those in like July. So we couldn't do that as part of the process unless they took them the year before, which does sometimes happen. It would never hurt a student. It would only help them if they did well. And so, yeah, I guess that's how they answer that.
Yeah, we'll see some self-reported on the Common App, but we are not using those at all in terms of basis for admission.
I'd say we're probably closer to UMass Lowell. We'll see them. It may be a part of the conversation, but a very small part of the conversation. Yeah, it's certainly way down there in the academic profile. Okay, I want to move on to our next topic, the writing. Essay, we got the Common App or the Coalition App essay. We've also got supplemental essays. How are you guys evaluating the writing? Do you have like a rubric or a grade for the students' writing? And how big of a role does it play in the decision? It's a lot there. We'll keep this compact. Kate, at Dickinson, how are you guys looking at the writing?
Yeah, we're looking at the writing, I'd say, kind of in two ways, with a pretty vast scale that we're determining both writing ability, but also in conjunction with that, what they're able to convey. Are we learning something about the student? That's what this piece of writing really should be about at the core, is we should finish reading that and feel like, I've just learned something and here's what I've learned, right? So how are they are they able to convey something about themselves? But also, how do we feel like, where do we feel like their level of writing falls in terms of the process? It's one element of everything that we're considering in the process.
How about, and I know, do you guys have a specific process or a grade or a rubric you use for evaluating writing it? Or is it more kind of open and narrative style?
So we do have a rubric, but it's also subjective too. And so I'd say a little bit of both. To me, it's the one chance that a student has to tell us something about them that we can't tell by looking at everything else. So that we really do use that, especially in a committee setting. So if a student's close, it can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, we're probably similar. We don't have a rubric. I think students worry that the misplaced comma is going to make or break their chances, or that a great essay is going to allow us to overlook a really weak transcript. That's very rarely the case. At Holy Cross, I say it can play a factor in the decision, but often it is consistent with the decision we had in mind already. I think it is certainly worthy of students' attention and hope for inspiration, but I think the level of stress sometimes that comes with it is outsized. Kate, do you guys have supplements at Dickinson?
We do actually, we didn't for a long time. We did this year add back in an additional question that students could submit if they wanted to share more about themselves or their background, anything that might not be anywhere else in the file that they'd like to share with us. And it's very short. I think it's only about max 250 words, or between 150 and 250. Brief, but allows students that chance to share anything additional.
I also said a lot to students this fall. Gosh, we talk about the essay a lot, especially in the fall, because it's what's for dinner, right? It's on the to-do list. It's usually not more important than the transcript. We also like talking about it because, gosh, we like reading them. You know, in our world in admissions, I think it's so easy to get caught up talking about the essay because it is a lot of fun to read the essays and it's a lot of fun to talk to students about their essays. But I think the talk is a little disproportionate to the actual weight in the application. So I always want our talk to be representative of the joy that we get from reading applications, not from the importance we place upon it. I'm not sure students really get that nuance, but certainly I think, kind of like Ed said, it's a way to measure writing ability, but it's also just a way to learn about who they are and who they might be on our campuses. All right, third topic, closer to the, our topic of our last webinar, recommendations. How are you reading? Do you guys grade recommendations as far as like the student is excellent in these recommendations or very good out of these recommendations? And, what role do they play? How about at Dickinson, Kate? Do you guys have a rubric in a way that you approach the recommendations or no?
Yeah, no, we don't. We are reading every detail of every recommendation that's submitted to us, and I think use it in a way to provide more background and context about the applicant, in whatever way that might look. I know in the last webinar, we talked about counselor recommendations when they can provide context on what that curriculum looks like for that student. That, for example, can be really helpful to me. Make sure I'm checking and balancing what I'm assuming or figuring out from the transcript that I'm on track there. But I'd also say, as I mentioned, what's really, it's important when we're thinking about a student's ability to be successful at the college, which is really, really important. Yes, we're looking at grades and looking at students in context of where they come from, but it's also so important to know if the learning environment is going to jive for the student. Is what they're going to, in the classes that they're going to sit in on our campuses, are they going to do well in those settings? So there are certain things we might be looking for in terms of their engagement in a classroom setting, or the ability to advocate for themselves in certain ways, things like that might help us to best assess, okay, they're going to do well here, or they're going to be able to ask for resources, or they aren't shy to connect with their faculty. Those types of things. I think we're looking at, again, kind of what does that real world day-to-day look like for the student, and that's what we're gleaning big time from the recommendations.
There's a question in here in the Q&A about narrative versus bullet point. I'll say two things. Number one, we talked about this a lot in our webinar in September. I will make sure in the email that goes out after this webinar that there's a link to the previous recording, which has been posted on YouTube. If I could quickly surmise our thoughts about narrative versus bullet, I think we found some bullet pointed recommendations that can be quite effective. I think Kate was sort of the leading champion for bullet point recommendations. It is not an automatic fix, I think, and I think there are still really good narrative recommendations out there. But I think there is no sort of rejection from the college side on bullet point recommendations as a theory or as a concept. Ed, any different approach that you guys are taking to recommendations and how it's sort of incorporated, how you incorporate that information into the application evaluation?
I mean, there's a lot of similar things we're looking for, but we do have like a list of things that we're looking for specifically. So like, realistic self-appraisal, long-range goals, leadership. Are they able to navigate the system, which is sort of what Kate was talking about in terms of like, can they engage in the resources that are there to help them? And so there's some very specific things that we are looking for. So it's a really good opportunity to get some contextual clues that we can get in some other parts, but it's one of the best places to find that kind of information because everything else is just kind of on a transcript or whatever. So it's really helpful I mean, the counselor recs are super helpful. Like they really are. I really want to emphasize that is the case. And like the format piece, it doesn't matter to me as long as it's done well and the information's good. I like a blend. Sometimes, the narrative combined with the bullets, great. So really, like, though, we are looking for some very specific contextual clues that are shown to be predictors of college success, and that's really what we're looking for.
Yeah. I had the experience this morning where I opened up an application and I looked at the transcript, and it was a little inconsistent. A student with great rigor, but the grades had been a little all over the place. And I looked excitedly to that counselor recommendation because I thought, like, there may be a story here. And not that this matters, but Ed, this is a guidance counselor who lives right down the street from us. And the first sentence in the recommendation let me know there's a story here. Okay, like, read on. And it was great because it really helped me understand that student's 4-year experience in high school. And without that, I would have been probably led to some incorrect assumptions. So I really valued that counselor recommendation, and valued that she let me know right there in the first sentence, there's more to read here. And was so important to our evaluation of that application as a whole. Sure.
I think participating in essay workshops, a lot of times a student will try and tackle something that's just like way too complex or heavy or emotional. And I often will say, I love what you're trying to do here, but it might be too much. You just maybe don't have enough life experience to like really know what this means, but this is a really good thing to talk about with your college counselor, and they can put it into the letter of rec. And so that's another example of a way that the recs can really help.
I'm with you. Sometimes I say to students, gosh, 650 words is not a lot of words to tell what happened to you over 4 years. Your counselor in certain situations can go beyond 650. So sometimes it might be easier for them to tell the whole story. I think you're exactly right. All right, let's go on to activities. Just a little preview here. We're going to do a lightning round of questions through the Q&A once we get through our topics here. So thanks for your questions in the Q&A. Keep them coming, but we're gonna get to those in a minute. How are you guys evaluating activities, Kate, at Dickinson? Again, do you have a scoring system, a rubric, or are you just sort of reading and absorbing? What's your approach?
Yeah, I think, certainly activities are a great way to get a sense of what the students' passions are. But often when I'm interviewing students, I'll say to them, what's hard for me in the moment sometimes is to look at the list of things and figure out, all right, what do I think the student loves the most? What are they passionate about? What do they get excited about? And so the interview gives me the chance to dig into some of those things a little bit deeper. But certainly what's really helpful is when students use the space they're provided when they're listing an activity to not only tell us how often they're doing it and for how many years, but also give us a little bit more in-depth information about what they do within that organization, or why they don't have much room, but why it might be special to them. That can be really helpful. But we're really ultimately looking at what community might mean for that student, which could look totally different to every student. And that's what can help build a community on our campuses. But are they majorly involved in lots of things, majorly involved in 1 or 2 things, moderately involved, minimally engaged? We're kind of looking at it like that. So not kind of as much of what they are doing, but how they're choosing what community looks like for them.
Ed, anything different at Lowell?
I think it's really helpful for us sometimes. So if a person has a ton of extracurriculars, great. We do look at them. So if a person has a bunch listed, great. We, sort of try to view those in the context of some other things. And if a student is a member of a bunch of groups and a leader and, key team member or whatever the case may be, great. A lot of times we'll see those and they're not filled in. We try not to make assumptions about that. One of the things that we do look at in the space of extracurriculars is, is the student working? Do they have family obligations at home? Maybe a lot of times both of those things. A student works 40 hours a week and they watch their siblings when their parents or guardians are not available to do that. And we really do award actual points in our rubric for those types of activities. And so not everybody can do debate or, be a captain of a team. And so we do try and look at a lot of those things in a similar way. And what we're looking for is, again, a lot of the things we're looking for that I mentioned in the letter of rec. And so things like long range goals, self-appraisal, leadership, a lot of those things you can sort of glean. Like if a person is managing a pizza place and watching their, siblings on weekends, that's an amazing responsibility. Probably really good chance that person is responsible and will do well in school because
Right.
they've already managed a lot, So anyway, that's how we look at it.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that too, I would just say, when we're thinking about engagement, again, that looks different person to person, but those are perfect examples of that. And that it doesn't mean necessarily club sports activities. It can mean work. It can mean family responsibilities. All of these things where, how often is someone doing something? Is it a sustained commitment? Is there a responsibility there? I think those are the areas we're thinking about when we think about how engaged someone might be and what they're balancing.
And I'm, one of the great things that came out of the pandemic was that I think we broadened the understanding of what can be included on the activities page of the Common App. We saw more family responsibilities listed than ever before. We saw more hobbies. And that was partly because there were no activities for a year, sometimes 2 years. And we've seen some of the students still willing to list those things on the application. I hope they continue because we do want to learn about those things that aren't necessarily maybe formal school activities. So please encourage your students to continue to list hobbies, family responsibilities, things that maybe before the pandemic we weren't used to seeing in that part of the application. Okay, fifth topic here. Let's go to interest. Particularly demonstrated interest. I didn't put demonstrated because it was too broad on the title there. It messed with my visual. Ed, do you guys care or look or count demonstrated interest or demonstrated engagement?
So we measure it, but we don't use it in any punitive way whatsoever. I think the only way that we use it in terms of decision making is if somebody very clearly has done their research and uses words and phrases and things that they could only decipher having visited campus or spoken to one of our reps, or maybe they're really good and read some specific thing that they so they took the effort to do that. I guess sometimes that's good, but no, we wouldn't measure it. We also, we do measure it, but we wouldn't use it in any way that's punitive or anything like that. And so, we're not looking at amount of touches and that equals this. It's not,
right.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe Kate, I'm not sure what you guys do.
Yeah, we certainly pay attention to how a student has engaged with us in this process. I think that helps us better understand how well does the student know us, right? And are they choosing to apply to us and thinking about us because they think that we are potentially a good match for them? I think twofold in this review process, we're thinking about, can the student do the work here? But we're also asking ourselves, is the student going to be happy here? And that also comes with understanding, what have they done to learn about us? And they think maybe they'll be happy here based on that. But also there are elements of fit in a file that might not have anything to do with a student demonstrating interest to us, but that we're reading the file and realizing, wow, this student could be really great here. And we're making notes for ourselves for if the student is admitted, what are we going to do for them before they make their decision, if they're going to come or not? So I think it can show itself in different ways, and certainly something we pay attention to for sure. But it is not a make or break piece of this puzzle.
I think only two things I would add is, I think what students miss sometimes is that we use it to evaluate ourselves sometimes, right? Did visiting that high school, was that a good idea? Should we continue to visit that high school? Some of those emails we're sending, is anybody opening them? If not, okay, we need to rethink our own strategy. So it's as much about evaluating ourselves as it is students. We're a school that offers interviews, so it's we get an opportunity to learn about the student through the interview. So it's less about that they've done it, but more about what we can gain from that opportunity. All right, I'm going to circle back to one question I forgot at the beginning. while I do that, I'm going to launch our very quick 2-question poll here for our participants. But since, maybe over the last maybe 7 to 10 years, there's been a few different models of reading applications that have emerged. The traditional old school one counselor reading an application still exists in some schools, but in other schools it's changed. Kate, can you give us a very brief description of how you guys are reading applications as a group at Dickinson?
Yeah, so our initial first read review is done in a pair. So I will sit down with another staff member in my office, or sit down meaning we sit down at our own desks and we're on Zoom together, and really splitting parts of the file. If it's one of my schools that I work with, I'm always going to be the one who's reviewing the transcript and the academic elements to that file. We divvy out kind of responsibilities within the file. And then we come together and we talk about the student. And I had come for many years of reading the first read on my own. And I say to students and counselors and folks sense that I've never talked more about a student in that initial read. And so I really do feel like we leave that initial setting really having gotten to know the student in a different kind of way when you're having a conversation. And then we move into a committee process that looks very similar to what a committee process would have looked like prior, but we do that initial read in a pair.
Yeah, we've seen more schools doing that, whether it's a pair or whether it's the more traditional committee-based evaluation where it's 3 people reading parts of the same application at the same time and then discussing and sometimes coming to a decision, sometimes not. We're still traditional at Holy Cross, one person reading the application, and then separately a second person will read the application. Any group work at Lowell, Ed?
Yep. So we have, our first stop is with the individual counselor who has that school where the student is applying from. If they're close for whatever reason, we have multiple different reviews. We have director review, dean review. We have a committee review as well. And also each individual decision is actually just a recommendation. It's subject to the final, sort, I guess. And so that's kind of how it works. But no, we don't have any paired reading, but we really do rely on the counselors to really get to know the schools as well as they possibly can. And we do really ask them to make some recommendations in that initial read based on contextual info and historical data and so forth.
That's awesome. All right, thanks for your participation in the poll. We had asked during our prior webinar about interest in school profile webinars and also maybe on a teacher recommendation webinar, and there was interest in both. So I just wanted to measure about your folks' interest in timing of those. So keep an eye on your inboxes for future webinars on both topics. All right, so it's time for the lightning round, everybody's most exciting part of sort of like Final Jeopardy. We're going to go very quickly through very quick questions, but even quicker answers on some of the questions in the Q&A. Quickly, Ed, are you looking for language, like a 3rd or 4th year of language for a STEM major?
Not closely.
Okay. Kate, do you prefer weighted or unweighted GPAs? Do you prefer it to be inclusive of all courses or only academic courses? What's your preference at Dickinson?
Doesn't matter to us because we're not going to use it in that review.
Same at Holy Cross, Ed?
Well, we do weigh, so yeah.
But you don't care if how the school does it, whether it's weighted or unweighted?
Oh, so no, honestly, the scale is irrelevant, because we're recalculating anyway. So we're putting it into our 4.0 scale. Yeah.
And when you recalculate, are you taking out religion courses? Would you count that as one of the 5 major areas or no?
We would count them generally because they're college prep. So anything college prep or higher. So, student does well in those, it can really help them out.
Do you factor in AP scores if a student self-studied for a test but did not take the class? At Holy Cross, we'll look at it, but it's a self-study AP score is not weighed nearly the same as a grade in an AP class is. How about you guys? Self-study AP scores?
I don't see that a lot.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Any major differences in the overall application review for transfer versus first year admission?
Yeah. I mean, for us, almost 40% of our graduates are transfers. It's very black and white. So that's the main difference. You either have the credit total and GPA or you do not. That's both the strength and the weakness of the process.
Right.
We do have a process where we can make some exceptions, but generally speaking, it's very black and white.
Okay, a question about the cover pages of recommendations, in particular, like council recommendations or teacher recommendations. Rather than a few keywords, can recommenders say refer to letter? I'm going to say absolutely yes.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And whether you do or not, I'm not sure I ever look at that page anyway. So you might as well. Do you have, Kate, do you have any thoughts on page limit on recommendation letters? Do they absolutely need to be a page long?
They don't need to be, I would say, any specific length. Preferably, a page is great. And I'm gonna add, we talked about bulleting versus narrative, and I think either way you go, you can't go wrong. But I had mentioned in our previous webinar that I really like when people bold things. And so if it is a narrative recommendation or if it is bulleted, things you want to really make sure we're seeing, bold them. That's really helpful. Make sure direct our eyes to certain things. So again, I think length doesn't necessarily matter, but it's pulling our eyes to the things that are really important that you want us to make sure we're paying attention to.
Do you consider American Sign Language as a language? At Holy Cross, we would say absolutely yes. Do you have any, do you look at online AP courses done through a school differently than a traditional in-person AP course? At Holy Cross, we wouldn't.
No.
We would see it as the same. Okay, great. More lightning round questions here. How about Ed? How about outside recommendations? Employer, the school principal, the family for whom you babysit. Any thoughts on outside recommendations?
Yeah, they can be awesome. Yeah, they can be really good. I mean, I think they have to know you though. So, recommendation from, some, perceived high profile person, if they don't know you, there's not a ton of value in that.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question. We keep saying AP courses, but obviously some schools have moved away from the AP curriculum and are calling it advanced or pinnacle or whatever, or we've got a lot more IB schools out there now. So I think we look at those and understand them in context, and we'll look at those courses, and I think more variety, the better. It makes reading applications a lot more interesting, personally. Let's see here. What would you consider the most rigorous coursework? AP, standard level IB, higher level IB? I think at Holy Cross we take each school in context, and certainly we look at both HL and SL IB courses and understand the context there. We're going to consider both of those, and I think that's what, I don't know, I've said this a lot lately, but that's what makes reading applications a human endeavor for the time being, because you do have to read and evaluate and understand context and perspective.
And I would just say, just make sure it's clear. Those of us who know your schools really well, we're going to know things about your schools, but there are also new readers every single year who come on board, and to be as clear as possible in that profile. What is the highest level of rigor a student can take, and what does that look like within your community, and kind of down that pipeline there. Help us understand what that looks like within your own community.
Are you guys waiving foreign language requirements for a student with a language-based learning disability? Okay, thank you for your quick answers. How do you look at dual enrollment courses at community college classes in terms of rigor in your academic evaluation? Great. Oh, I just kicked the lights off. Great question.
It's as rigorous as any of those highest level classes. We're considering them in that same vein.
Same.
Here's another great question. Do you care about the rankings grid that counselors fill out on the secondary school report? I'm guessing, is this the one of the top, or
top few, or, you know, for academics
Yeah.
and extracurriculars, yeah,
So
character.
I generally say no, but there are some schools, particularly like narrative assessment schools, where that is a pretty important checkbox.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say if there are people checking things off on the low end of that scale, whether it's the counselor or the teacher recommendations, they have their scale too. I'd say that we're seeing, drawing my eyes, or my eyes are being drawn to the lower check marks versus the higher.
And there's a few questions that flirt with this, so I'll mention it. And Ed, you mentioned it. Sort of narrative assessments. We're seeing more, sort of more schools move away from traditional grading. How are you reading these less traditional grading structures, or just no grades offered? What's that process like as a reader?
Well, I just read all of them for UMass Lowell. that is true. So similar to what I was saying before about how we asked readers to get to know their schools, that's what I'm trying to do. And oftentimes there are like contextual clues within language that counselors choose to use, or teachers of particular subjects that you really can only know if you're reading a bunch of those. If they're one-off apps from places that we're not that familiar with, it can be a little bit more of a challenge. But even in then, I find the profile can be super helpful. Sometimes I'll reach out to a counselor and say, hey, is there anything I should be aware of here in terms of like language that you're using intentionally that I should be like understanding a little bit more? But also like I find when you read the narrative assessment, you really get a sense of whether or not the student actually learned the content, and it's super helpful. Yeah, so I think that answers that.
I being sensitive to time, and we're blending into maybe the second round of classes here. I just want to say thanks to you both for participating in today's webinar. Thanks to all of our school counselors logged in today. Watch your emails for upcoming webinars and upcoming resources. The recording will be available to this, and we will let you know when that's been posted. Thanks for coming, and have a great winter.